The crystal wine glass slipped from between my fingers as if in slow motion. I watched it fall, catching the light from the chandelier in rainbow prisms before it shattered against the polished mahogany table. The sound cut through the stunned silence like a gunshot. "Say that again, James." My voice was unnervingly calm, even to my own ears. "I want everyone at this table to hear exactly what you just whispered to me." His face drained of color as 12 pairs of eyes turned to him. Our closest friends, his business partners, my sister. The intimate dinner party I'd spent weeks planning had frozen in a tableau of half-raised forks and parted lips. "Eliza." "Please," he started, his hand reaching for mine across the table. I pulled away and stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The rage bubbling inside me was foreign and frightening. A volcano I'd kept dormant for 15 years of marriage. "Tell them how you just leaned over and told your wife." My voice cracked despite my determination to remain composed. "That you're in love with someone else. That you've found your soulmate. Go on, James. Don't be shy now." His eyes pleaded with me, but it was too late. I could already feel my fingers closing around the edge of my dinner plate, the expensive Wedgwood china his mother had given us as a wedding present, our anniversary dinner. 15 years dissolved in 6 whispered words. The plate left my hand before I could reconsider. 3 months earlier. Earth to Vanessa. Margot waved her hand in front of my face, breaking my trance. "Sorry," I mumbled, setting down my coffee mug. The corporate cafe buzzed around us, filled with the usual Monday morning chaos of laptops, presentation rehearsals, and caffeine-fueled networking. Margot tilted her head, the gesture sending her curtain of dark hair cascading over one shoulder. "You've been spacing out a lot lately. Everything okay with you and James?" I smiled automatically. "Of course. Just the usual. His work schedule is insane with the merger, and I've got the Harper Hospitality account keeping me at the office until midnight. Ships passing. The glamorous life of power couples," Margot said with a theatrical sigh. As my closest friend since college and now colleague at Atwood Marketing, she knew the rhythms of my marriage better than anyone. "When did you last have a date night?" I stared into my coffee, calculating. 6 weeks? Maybe 7? "Vanessa!" Margot looked genuinely alarmed. "That's relationship suicide for normal couples, let alone 2 workaholics like you and James." "We're fine," I insisted, though a nagging doubt had been growing lately. The distance between James and me seemed to be expanding beyond the normal ebb and flow of a long marriage. Last night, I'd fallen asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home from drinks with a client. When I woke at 2 a.m., he was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at his phone with an expression I couldn't decipher, somewhere between guilt and wonder. He didn't notice me watching him. "I'm planning something special for our anniversary," I told Margot, pushing the memory away. "A dinner party with our closest friends. 15 years deserves a celebration, right?" 15 years, Margot whistled. "That's practically a miracle in this day and age." I nodded, pride warming my chest. James and I had been the golden couple since Princeton, him with his razor-sharp business mind and charismatic leadership, me with my creative talent and drive. We'd built our careers in tandem, climbing the ladders of success in New York's competitive landscape. Our brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, our summer cottage in Cape Cod, our carefully curated life, it was everything we'd worked for. "Speaking of miracles," Margot lowered her voice, "did you hear about Rebecca from legal?" "No, what about her?" "Pregnant. After 5 rounds of IVF." The words hit me like a physical blow. I forced my expression to remain neutral, though I felt the familiar pain unfurling in my chest. "That's wonderful." "I'll send her flowers." Margot reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She was one of the few people who knew about our struggles, the years of treatments, the miscarriages, the final devastating diagnosis that had closed that door forever. "Sorry," she said softly. "I wasn't thinking. It's ancient history," I lied. "We've moved on." My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. "The Harper team is waiting. Let's go dazzle them with our brilliance." As we gathered our things, Margot said, "Hey, I meant to ask, have you met James's new assistant yet? Olivia something? I shook my head. He mentioned her, but I haven't been to his office in ages. Why? Margot shrugged, but something in her expression made me pause. No reason. I met her at the intercorporate mixer last week. She seems dedicated. Before I could press for details, we were swept into the current of the workday. That evening, I arrived home earlier than usual, determined to reconnect with my husband. I'd stopped at the market and bought ingredients for James's favorite meal: roasted salmon with herbs, wild rice, and asparagus. A bottle of the Chardonnay we'd discovered on our honeymoon in Napa completed the surprise. The house was silent when I entered, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was finding James already home, sitting in the dim light of his study. "Hey you," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "You're home early." He looked up, momentarily disoriented as if I'd interrupted a deep thought. "Vanessa, hi. I thought I'd cook tonight," I said, holding up the grocery bag. "A proper dinner, like civilized people who don't survive on takeout and protein bars." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That sounds nice, but I already ate." "Sorry." My enthusiasm deflated. "Oh, okay. I didn't know you'd be home," he added. As if that explained everything. I studied him. The slight shadow on his jaw, the loosened tie, the faint crease between his brows that appeared when he was troubled. At 42, James Coleman was still as handsome as the day we met, with his strong jawline and intelligent green eyes, though strands of silver had begun to thread through his dark hair. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "You seem distracted." "Just work," he said, the answer he always gave. "The Richardson merger is becoming a nightmare. The CFO is pushing back on our valuation." I nodded, though something felt off. James usually thrived on corporate battle, coming alive when discussing strategy and negotiations. Now he seemed distant, almost disinterested in his own story. "Well, more for me then," I said, lifting the grocery bag. "Want to keep me company while I cook?" "Actually, I have some calls to make," he said, already turning back to his laptop. "Client in Tokyo." I retreated to the kitchen, unsettled. As I prepped the salmon, I noticed James's suit jacket draped over a kitchen chair. Picking it up to hang it properly, a habit from years of marriage to a man who never put his clothes away, a business card fell from the pocket. Olivia Chen, executive assistant to James Coleman. Beneath her name and office contact information was a handwritten note. "My personal cell. Call anytime." Oh, I stared at the elegant script, the small heart dotting the I in Olivia. Something cold and heavy settled in my stomach. Setting the card on the counter, I continued preparing dinner for one, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. James had always had female colleagues and assistants. I wasn't the jealous type. We trusted each other completely. Still, I found myself opening my laptop after dinner, typing Olivia Chen into the search bar. Her LinkedIn profile appeared first. Harvard Business School, impressive internships, hired by James's firm 9 months ago. I clicked through to her Instagram, which was public: hiking trails, art exhibits, coffee art, the standard millennial portfolio. And then I saw it, a photo from 3 weeks ago at an industry conference in Chicago. James stood at a podium, mid-speech, captured from the audience. The caption read, "Watching the master at work. Brilliant as always. Inspired mentorship." James had told me that conference was brutally boring. He hadn't mentioned his admiring assistant was there. I scrolled further and found more. Subtle references to late nights at the office. Inside jokes about client meetings. A photo of a sunset from a hotel room with the caption, "Business travel has its moments." The same weekend, James had been in Boston for emergency meetings. My hands were shaking when I closed the laptop. This was ridiculous. I was spinning paranoid fantasies from an Instagram account and a business card with a phone number. Things that had perfectly innocent explanations. But as I cleaned up the kitchen, I caught sight of our wedding photo on the wall, young and radiant. James looking at me with undisguised adoration. When was the last time he had looked at me that way? That night, James came to bed after I was already half asleep. I felt him slide under the covers, maintaining the careful distance that had become our norm. Neither of us reached across the invisible boundary. "James?" I murmured into the darkness. Are we okay?" A pause. "What do you mean?" "Us. Our marriage." "Are we good?" He shifted, and I felt his hand find mine. "Of course we are. We're just busy. It's always like this during big projects." "Yeah," I said, squeezing his hand. "You're right." But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in our carefully constructed world, and I had been too busy to notice until now. The weeks leading up to our anniversary became an exercise in hyper-awareness. I found myself tracking James's movements with the precision of a scientist, noting his late nights, his distracted mornings, the way he guarded his phone. Meanwhile, I threw myself into planning the perfect anniversary dinner party. 15 of our closest friends, a private chef, vintage wines, and a custom playlist spanning the soundtrack of our relationship. If something was wrong, surely this celebration of our history together would help us find our way back. "You're overcompensating," Margot said bluntly when I showed her the elaborate invitation design. "I'm celebrating," I corrected her, though I knew she was right. 15 years is a big deal. We were having lunch at our favorite spot near the office, a rare midday break in our packed schedules. "Have you talked to him about your concerns?" Margot asked. I picked at my salad. "There's nothing concrete to discuss. He'd think I was crazy if I started accusing him based on a feeling in an Instagram feed." Margot's eyes narrowed. "What Instagram feed?" I hadn't told her about my late-night stalking of Olivia Chen, which had become something of a habit. "His assistant. She posts about him sometimes. Professional admiration, that's all." "Ah," Margot said, in a tone that implied volumes. "What?" "Just say it." She set down her fork. I didn't want to say anything because it might be nothing, but at that mixer, she couldn't take her eyes off him. And the way she talked about him, Vanessa, it was beyond professional admiration. My stomach clenched. "That doesn't mean anything. James wouldn't—" "Of course not," Margot said quickly. "James adores you. Always has." The reassurance felt hollow against the mounting evidence I'd been collecting. The mysterious weekend trips. The late-night texts that made him smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. The growing emotional distance. That evening, I decided to surprise James at his office. I told myself it was to discuss final details for the anniversary party, but we both knew it was a reconnaissance mission. The Coleman group occupied 3 floors of a sleek midtown skyscraper. I knew every inch of the space, had helped design some of it during their last renovation. The receptionist waved me through with a smile. "He's in a meeting," she said, "but should be finishing up soon if you want to wait in his office." I nodded and made my way down the familiar corridor. James's corner office door was ajar, and I could hear voices inside, his deep timbre and a lighter feminine laugh. I paused outside, suddenly uncertain. This felt invasive even for a spouse. Before I could decide whether to knock or retreat, the conversation inside became clearer. "You're overthinking it," James was saying. "The presentation is perfect. I'm nervous," the woman, Olivia, I presumed, replied. "The board is intimidating. You'll win them over, just like you won me over." There was a charged silence that made my chest tighten. "James?" Her voice had dropped to an intimate murmur. "We need to talk about what happened in Boston." My blood ran cold. Boston. The emergency meetings 3 weeks ago. "Not here," James said, his voice tense. "Not now. Then when? You keep saying we'll figure it out, but— Olivia, please. I need time." I backed away from the door, nearly colliding with a passing colleague. Mumbling an apology, I fled to the elevator, my heart hammering against my ribs. On the street below, I gulped the humid summer air, trying to calm the storm inside me. I still had no definitive proof, just fragments that my mind was assembling into a nightmare scenario. But one thing was clear. Something had happened in Boston. Something James was hiding from me. When he came home that night, I was waiting in the living room, a glass of wine in hand. Vanessa? He looked surprised to find me there, bathed in the soft light of a single lamp. Everything okay? I stopped by your office today, I said, watching his face carefully. A flash of something, alarm? Guilt? Crossed his features before he composed himself. Oh? I was in meetings most of the afternoon, so I heard. I took a sip of wine. I wanted to finalize the guest list for the anniversary dinner. Make sure we haven't forgotten anyone important. Relief softened his expression. Right. The dinner. I was thinking we should invite Olivia, I said, keeping my tone light. Since she's such an important part of your work life. James stilled, his hand paused in the act of loosening his tie. She's just my assistant, Vanessa, is she? I set down my wine glass. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like she might be more than that. His face hardened. What exactly are you implying? I don't know, James. Why don't you tell me what happened in Boston? The color drained from his face. You were eavesdropping on me at the office? I overheard something I wasn't meant to hear, I corrected him, which seems to be a theme lately. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times throughout our marriage. This is ridiculous. I'm not having this conversation. That's becoming a pattern too, I said, rising to my feet. Not having conversations. Not coming home. Not being present even when you are home. I'm working, Vanessa. Building something, for us. You know how important this merger is. Is that what you were building in Boston? For us? His eyes flashed with anger. You're crossing a line. No, I said, my voice breaking. I think you already did that. We stood facing each other across the living room, 15 years of history vibrating in the space between us. For a moment, I thought he might finally tell me the truth, whatever it was. Instead, he turned away. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight. As he climbed the stairs, I called after him. We're hosting 15 people here in 2 weeks to celebrate our marriage. James, are we even going to have one by then? He paused on the landing but didn't turn around. I don't know what you want me to say. The truth would be a start. He disappeared upstairs without another word. I spent that night on the couch, scrolling through old photos on my phone, James and me in happier times, building our life brick by brick. The trip to Japan for our 5th anniversary. Building the Cape Cod cottage together. Holiday parties and career milestones and quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and crosswords. When had it started to unravel? Was it the final failed IVF treatment 3 years ago? The growing demands of our respective careers? Or had we simply drifted apart in the way that couples sometimes do, waking up one day to find themselves living parallel lives instead of shared ones? Whatever the cause, I realized with a sinking clarity that our anniversary dinner was no longer a celebration. It was a last stand. The night of our anniversary dinner arrived with the charged anticipation of an approaching storm. James and I had been circling each other for days, maintaining a brittle civility for the sake of appearances. I'd spent the afternoon with the caterers and florist, transforming our dining room into a vision of elegant intimacy. Cream roses and eucalyptus runners down the mahogany table, vintage crystal glowing in the light of tapered candles, place cards in gold calligraphy. The irony wasn't lost on me, creating the perfect tableau of marital success while my actual marriage was crumbling beneath the surface. James came downstairs. As I was making final adjustments to the table settings, dressed in the charcoal suit I'd always loved on him. Everything looks beautiful, he said, his voice gentle. A peace offering. I straightened a napkin, not meeting his eyes. Thank you. The florist outdid herself. Vanessa, he began, stepping closer. About these past few weeks, the doorbell interrupted whatever he was about to say. Our first guests had arrived. We should talk, he whispered as I brushed past him. After everyone leaves. I nodded, though dread pooled in my stomach. After everyone leaves? The phrase felt ominous, like the calm announcement before an execution. The evening proceeded like a well-directed play, with James and I performing our roles as the happy couple. We greeted our friends with practiced smiles, accepted congratulations on our milestone, and reminisced about our early days together. If anyone noticed the tension crackling between us, they were too polite to mention it. Or perhaps our performance was better than I thought. Dinner was served. 5 exquisite courses paired with wines that told the story of our relationship. The Napa Chardonnay from our honeymoon. The Bordeaux we'd discovered in Paris on our 5th anniversary. The Barolo from our trip to Italy after my promotion to creative director. As dessert was being served, a recreation of our wedding cake, James stood to make a toast. Our friends fell silent, lifting their glasses in anticipation. 15 years, he began, his voice steady as he gazed around the table. 15 years with this extraordinary woman. I watched him, trying to reconcile this public version of my husband, charming, devoted, eloquent, with the distant stranger of recent weeks. Vanessa and I have built a life together that exceeds anything I could have imagined when we met at Princeton, he continued. She has been my partner, my confidant, my greatest supporter through every challenge and triumph. His eyes met mine across the table, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the old James, the one who had once looked at me as if I were the answer to every question. To my wife, he raised his glass. Thank you for 15 unforgettable years. Our friends echoed the toast, glasses clinking as they murmured congratulations. I took a sip of champagne, forcing a smile that felt like it might shatter my face. As conversation resumed around us, James leaned across the table toward me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I need to tell you something, he said. I've been struggling with how to say this. The room seemed to recede, the voices of our friends fading to a distant hum as I focused on my husband's face. Vanessa, he whispered, I've fallen in love with someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs even though I'd suspected this very thing for weeks. She understands me in a way I haven't felt in years, he continued, his eyes pleading for understanding. I've found my soulmate, Vanessa. I didn't mean for it to happen, but the crystal wine glass slipped from between my fingers as if in slow motion. I watched it fall, catching the light from the chandelier in rainbow prisms before it shattered against the polished mahogany table. The sound cut through the stunned silence like a gunshot. Say that again, James. My voice was unnervingly calm, even to my own ears. I want everyone at this table to hear exactly what you just whispered to me. The dinner party froze in suspended animation, forks halfway to mouths, wine glasses arrested mid-sip. In the silence that followed my demand, I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds of my marriage's final moments. Eliza? Please. James started, his hand reaching for mine across the table. I pulled away and stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The rage bubbling inside me was foreign and frightening. A volcano I'd kept dormant for 15 years of marriage. Tell them how you just leaned over and told your wife. My voice cracked despite my determination to remain composed. That you're in love with someone else. That you've found your soulmate. Go on, James, don't be shy now. His eyes pleaded with me, but it was too late. I could already feel my fingers closing around the edge of my dinner plate, the expensive Wedgwood china his mother had given us as a wedding present, our anniversary dinner. 15 years dissolved in 6 whispered words. The plate left my hand before I could reconsider, sailing across the table in a graceful arc before connecting with James's shocked face. It shattered on impact, sending porcelain shards and chocolate mousse exploding in all directions. Gasps erupted around the table. James reeled backward, a thin line of blood appearing on his cheek where a fragment had cut him. Jesus Christ, Vanessa, he shouted, touching his face and staring at the blood on his fingertips. Don't you dare act surprised, I hissed, trembling with a rage so pure it felt clarifying. Don't you dare act like the victim when you just destroyed 15 years of our life together at our own anniversary dinner. Our guests were frozen in horrified fascination. My sister Elena was the first to move, standing slowly as if approaching a wild animal. Vanessa, she said softly, maybe we should— No, I cut her off. Everyone stays. I want witnesses for this. I want everyone to hear what the great James Coleman has done. I turned to our friends. these people who had been the supporting cast in the story of our marriage. My husband just informed me that he's in love with someone else. His 28-year-old assistant, I presume. The one he took to Boston for emergency meetings? Color flooded James's face. This isn't how I wanted to do this, no? I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. How exactly did you want to do it, James? After dessert? Or were you planning to wait until everyone left so you could pack your bags and disappear into the sunset with Olivia? You don't understand, he said, rising to his feet. This isn't some cliched office affair. What Olivia and I have is, if you say special or different, I swear to God I will throw every piece of china on this table, I warned him. He fell silent, his jaw working as he struggled for words. One of his colleagues, Mark from the legal department, cleared his throat. Maybe we should give you two some privacy. Privacy? I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. That's exactly what allowed this to happen. All those private texts, private hotel rooms, private lies. I turned back to James, who was still standing with dessert dripping from his expensive suit. How long? Vanessa, how long? He swallowed hard. 6 months, 6 months. Half a year of deception while I planned client strategies and dinner parties, oblivious to the collapse of my marriage. 6 months, I echoed. Were you ever going to tell me, or just keep leading this double life indefinitely? I was trying to find the right moment, he said, his voice strained. I never wanted to hurt you. Yet here we are, I gestured to the ruined dinner table, the shocked faces of our friends. And I'm very hurt, James. Something in me broke then, the dam holding back 15 years of compromises, disappointments, and unspoken resentments. The words poured out of me in a torrent. Do you know what I've given up for you? For us? My body, for one thing. Years of invasive treatments and hormones and surgeries trying to have the family you wanted. My career advancement, moving to the smaller Atwood office so you could take the position at Coleman Group. My dreams of living abroad. Because your work needed you in New York. James flinched with each accusation. But I couldn't stop now that the floodgates had opened. And after all that, you throw it away for what? Some fantasy of youth and passion with a woman who worships the ground you walk on? Who hasn't seen you fail or grieve or lose your temper over nothing? That's not fair, James protested. Olivia and I connect on a level that you and I haven't in years. When was the last time we really talked, Vanessa? When was the last time we saw each other as more than convenient companions in this life we built? His words cut deep because there was truth in them. We had drifted, become strangers sharing a mortgage and a social calendar. So this is my fault? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. No, James sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not about fault. We both checked out of this marriage years ago. The difference is that I found something that woke me up again. I stared at him. This man I'd built a life with, now suddenly a stranger. And you couldn't have woken up with me? After everything we've been through together? I tried, he said, his voice breaking. God, Vanessa, I tried. But we've been living parallel lives for so long now. You with your career and social obligations, me with the company. When did we last really see each other? I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words stuck in my throat. Because underneath my rage was a terrible recognition. A part of me had sensed the growing distance between us and had chosen to ignore it, to focus instead on the external trappings of a successful marriage. My sister touched my arm gently. Vanessa, let's go upstairs for a minute. Get some air, I shook her off. No, I'm not leaving my own anniversary dinner. James can leave if he wants to go. Our eyes locked across the debris of broken china and spilled wine. For a moment, I saw a flash of the boy I'd fallen in love with at 20, earnest and vulnerable beneath his confident exterior. I never meant for this to happen, he said quietly. But I can't pretend anymore. I'm sorry, Vanessa. I'm so sorry. The genuine regret in his voice was somehow worse than anger would have been. It confirmed what I'd been denying. This wasn't a passing infatuation or midlife crisis. My husband had fallen in love with someone else and our marriage was over. I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. Get out! Vanessa, get out! I didn't raise my voice, but the command carried the weight of finality. James looked around at our friends, most of whom were studying their wine glasses with intense concentration, unwilling to meet his eyes. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the dining room. The front door closed with a soft click that echoed in the silence. One by one, our guests murmured awkward apologies and slipped away, leaving only my sister and Margot behind. They moved around me like gentle ghosts, clearing plates and extinguishing candles, dismantling the elaborate stage set of my marriage's final act. I sat motionless at the head of the table, my fingers tracing the rim of an overturned wine glass, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The dawn light filtered through the dining room curtains, casting long shadows across the ruins of the previous night. I hadn't slept, instead keeping vigil at the table like a shipwreck survivor clinging to floating debris. Elena and Margot had tried to convince me to go upstairs, to sleep, to take one of the sedatives Elena had in her purse from her last international flight. I'd refused, sending them home with promises that I wouldn't do anything rash. Now, in the harsh clarity of morning, I surveyed the wreckage, literal and metaphorical. Dried chocolate mousse crusted on the linen tablecloth, shards of porcelain glinting among wilting flower petals, 15 years reduced to fragments. My phone had been buzzing intermittently through the night. James, then Elena, then Margot, then James again. I ignored them all. What was there left to say? The house seemed cavernous in its silence, echoing with the absence of the future I'd planned within its walls. Children who would never run down its hallways. Anniversaries that would never be celebrated. A growing old together that had been severed prematurely. When the doorbell rang at 9 a.m., I was still sitting at the dining table, now with a cup of cold coffee between my palms. I considered not answering, but the persistent ringing suggested whoever it was wouldn't be easily deterred. I opened the door to find Olivia Chen on my doorstep. She was exactly as I'd imagined. From her photos, petite and stylish in a navy sheath dress, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. What the photos hadn't captured was the nervous determination in her eyes, or the way her hands twisted the strap of her designer handbag. "Mrs. Coleman," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. "I'm Olivia Chen." "I know who you are," I replied, making no move to invite her in. "What I don't know is why you're at my house," she squared her shoulders. "I need to speak with you. About James." Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to scream at this woman who had helped dismantle my marriage. But a deeper, calmer part, the part that had emerged from the nuclear fallout of last night, was curious. 5 minutes, I said, stepping back to allow her entry. I led her to the kitchen, unwilling to return to the dining room crime scene. She perched on a bar stool at the island while I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "James doesn't know I'm here," she began, setting her bag beside her. "He'd be furious if he knew." "That makes 2 of us," I said dryly. "Why are you here, Olivia?" She met my gaze directly, and I was surprised by the compassion I saw there. "To tell you the truth. The whole truth, not just James's version of it." "I think I got the headlines last night," I said. "You're soulmates. Congratulations," she winced. "He shouldn't have told you like that. At your anniversary dinner of all places." She shook her head. "That wasn't the plan. There was a plan?" "He was supposed to talk to you last week," she said. "To tell you he wanted a divorce. Cleanly, honestly not," she gestured vaguely. "Not like this." "How considerate," I said, the sarcasm thick in my voice. "And what was your role in this plan? Waiting in the wings while he did the dirty work?" "I told him I wouldn't see him again until he'd ended things properly with you," she said, surprising me. "That's why he's been so distant lately. He's been avoiding the conversation." I laughed without humor. "So you're the ethical mistress? Is that why you're here? To claim the moral high ground?" Her composure cracked slightly. "No. I'm here because you deserve to know that this isn't some meaningless fling or midlife crisis. And it's not your fault." "How generous of you to absolve me," I said. But my anger was starting to feel performative. A shield against the real pain underneath, Olivia sighed. running a finger along the edge of the marble countertop. I didn't plan to fall in love with a married man. My parents divorced when I was 12 because my father had an affair. I know what that does to a family. Then why? I asked, genuinely curious despite myself. Why James? Why my husband? Because he was drowning, she said simply. And so was I. Something in her tone made me pause. What do you mean? She looked up, her eyes suddenly damp. Did you know James has been in therapy for depression for the past 2 years? The question hit me like a physical blow. What? No, he would have told me if... Would he? She interrupted gently. When was the last time you two really talked? Not about work or social engagements or household logistics, but about what you were feeling? About the hard stuff? I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it again. When had we last had a real conversation? Before the final failed IVF? Before the promotion that had doubled my workload? I couldn't remember. James and I started talking, really talking, during the Chicago conference, Olivia continued. We both ended up at the hotel bar after the last session. He'd just come from a therapy appointment over video. He was raw, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him at the office. I could picture it clearly. James, slightly disheveled after a day of presentations, nursing a scotch in some anonymous hotel bar, his guard down in a way it rarely was at home. He told me about the depression, about feeling like a failure, because he couldn't give you the family you wanted, Olivia said. About how the distance between you had become so vast he didn't know how to bridge it anymore. Each word was a needle piercing the bubble of righteous anger I'd been floating in. James, depressed? How had I missed that? How had I not seen the pain in my own husband? We just talked that night, she continued. For hours. About real things. Grief, purpose, loneliness. It was like finding water in a desert. I sank onto a bar stool across from her, suddenly unsteady. And then? We started having lunch together. Talking more. It wasn't physical at first. We were just two people connecting on a level that felt life-saving somehow. She looked down at her hands. Boston was where everything changed. Where we crossed a line we couldn't uncross. I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. Why are you telling me all this? Because I want you to know it wasn't about sex or excitement or his ego, she said earnestly. It was about being seen. Really seen in all the messy, broken places. James and I recognized something in each other, a similar wound maybe. And in recognizing it, we help each other heal. The irony was excruciating. While I'd been planning the perfect anniversary dinner, arranging flowers and selecting wines to celebrate our outwardly perfect marriage, my husband had been finding genuine connection elsewhere. Do you know what the worst part is? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I understand exactly what you're describing. That recognition, that sense of being truly seen. It's what James and I had once. Olivia nodded, her expression somber. He told me. He said the early years with you were the happiest of his life. Until they weren't, I finished. Until life happened, she corrected gently. Careers, fertility struggles, grief, growing apart. It happens to so many couples. I studied this woman, this rival who had come to my home not to gloat or apologize, but to offer a kind of clarity. In another life, we might have been friends. What do you want from me, Olivia? I asked finally. Forgiveness. Blessing? What? Nothing, she said, sliding off the bar stool and retrieving her bag. I just thought you deserved the whole story. Not just the part where a younger woman stole your husband, but the part where two broken people found a connection they weren't looking for. She moved toward the door, then paused. He loved you, Vanessa. For 15 years, he loved you with everything he had. Sometimes love just changes, evolves, or ends. After she left, I wandered back to the dining room, surveying the aftermath of last night's destruction with new eyes. The broken china, the stained tablecloth, the wilted flowers, it all seemed like such a perfect metaphor for what had happened to my marriage. Beautiful on the surface, shattered underneath. I began to clean up, gathering shards of porcelain with careful fingers, separating salvageable pieces from those beyond repair. As I worked, I thought about what Olivia had said, about being seen, about connection, about the slow drift that can happen between two people sharing a life. James had been drowning, and I hadn't noticed. I'd been so focused on maintaining the perfect exterior of our life together that I'd missed the fractures forming in its foundation. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Can we talk?" "Please." I stared at the message for a long moment, considering my options. I could rage against him, fight for our marriage, hire the most ruthless divorce attorney in New York. I could make him pay for the humiliation, the betrayal, the years I'd invested in us. Or I could acknowledge that perhaps what had broken last night wasn't just plates, but the illusion that we were still the same people who had fallen in love 15 years ago. "Yes," I texted back. "We can talk." 3 months later, I stood in the empty brownstone, the last of my belongings packed into boxes in the hallway. James and I had sold the house as part of the divorce settlement, neither of us wanting to live with the ghosts of our former life together. The divorce had been as amicable as such things can be. No children to fight over, a clear prenup, and two people too exhausted by grief to summon the energy for vindictiveness. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter where I'd stood that morning with Olivia. So much had changed since then. I'd moved into a bright apartment in Chelsea, started therapy, reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the busy years of my marriage. James had moved in with Olivia, looking both guilty and relieved whenever our paths crossed at lawyer meetings. The doorbell rang, the movers, right on time. As they began loading boxes into the truck, I took one last walk through the empty rooms, saying goodbye to the life I'd built here. The dining room where our marriage had combusted. The living room where we'd planned our future. The bedroom where we'd loved and dreamed and eventually grown apart. On the mantel, I'd left one item, a single Wedgwood plate that had somehow survived the anniversary dinner massacre. I picked it up now, running my finger along its delicate blue pattern. For a moment, I considered smashing it. One final act of destruction to mark the end of this chapter. But instead, I carefully wrapped it in newspaper and placed it in my purse. Some things I was learning could be both broken and preserved, transformed into something new while still honoring what they had once been. Outside, the October sunlight dappled the brownstone steps where James and I had posed for photos on the day we bought the house. I paused there, breathing in the crisp autumn air, feeling strangely light despite the weight of endings. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Ready for dinner?" "The reservation's at 7. "On my way," I replied, just saying goodbye to the house. As I walked away from the brownstone for the last time, I realized that what I was really saying goodbye to was not just a house or a marriage, but a version of myself. The woman who had defined herself through the prism of being James Coleman's wife. The woman who had mistaken perfection for happiness. That night, at dinner with Elena, I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. The weight of pretense finally lifted from my shoulders. "You seem different," my sister observed, studying me over her wine glass. "I am different," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Everything's different now." Elena smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "To new beginnings?" I clinked my glass against hers, thinking of the shattered plate from that disastrous night. How its fragments had scattered across the dinner table like the pieces of the life I thought I wanted. "To new beginnings," I agreed, "and to the endings that make them possible."
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.